20 December 1944, northern edge of the Ardennes, a thin line of trees holding a rim of frost as dawn lifted over a field, littered with torn webbing and abandoned rations. He had been moving between shell scrapes before first light, carrying a battered canvas bag and a length of folded blanket that never stayed clean for long. The men called to him with the plain economy of winter voices, each name reduced to a syllable, each wound a decision. He worked without flourish, tying off a bandage with gloved fingers and marking a trouser leg with a charcoal cross so litter teams would not miss the casualty in the drifted snow. His task was finite and relentless. Then the first fire order cracked through the timber, and a ridge to the east began to move with shadows that did not belong to the trees. The sector had been quiet the week before, a resting place on a long front now suddenly alive with reports of armor and infantry pushing west. The battalion held a road junction that mattered because every map said so. Communications posted a strength that looked adequate on paper and thin on the ground. A mixed German force, a battalion at least, tested the flanks with mortars and probing bursts from machine pistols. Forward platoons pulled back by bounds, counting yards, marking landmarks, and calling for smoke they did not receive. In that pause, the medic became the only man between a dispersing line and a converging enemy. He had 3 smoke grenades in his bag, not because regulations advised it, but because habit did. The metal cylinders felt heavier than their size suggested, paint scuffed, pins wired for rough hands in cold. They were not weapons in the ordinary sense. They were time, in colored clouds. He checked the fuse delays as he would check a pressure dressing, then looked at the dip of ground between the disabled half-track and the hedgerow, where 2 riflemen waited for a lull that would not come. He pulled the first pin and lobbed the grenade low. White smoke opened like breath on glass, slow at first, then confident, obscuring the contour line and the rifle barrels that hunted it. The company command post recorded the German strength as 2 rifle companies with attached machine guns and at least 1 light mortar section. Their approach followed the doctrine taught for woodland fighting: fix the enemy with suppressive fire, infiltrate under cover, then collapse the flank. The counter was simple in theory and costly in practice. The American platoons needed a screen to break observation, reform and withdraw to the next line of trees where fields of fire improved. The artillery liaison waited for clearance. The smoke came from a single medical bag and the judgment of a non-combatant working inside the arcs of several machine guns. He moved across the field in a straight line, not because it was safe, but because wounded men do not move in zigzags. Each traverse carried a looped narrative: reach, lift, reassure, mark, return. When the smoke thinned, he threw again, building a corridor that did not exist on any diagram. German fire chased the horizon of the cloud and fell short. A runner stumbled into the lane, found his feet, and crossed to the hedge. A radio operator crawled, dragging his set by the strap. 2 litter teams entered from opposite ends and met in the middle without words, working by touch and habit. The medic counted seconds as a quartermaster counts cartridges. Battalion figures later showed ammunition expenditure doubling in the hour before noon, a sign of pressure rather than waste. Rations were behind schedule. Hot food had not reached the forward companies for 2 days. Aid station intake spiked to more than 30 cases that morning, with a steady mix of blast injuries and cold exposure. The weather report listed visibility at less than 200 yards in the valleys, more on the ridges, with winds steady from the east. None of this explained why the German advance slowed along that field. The explanation lay in a white wall that shifted whenever the attackers adjusted their line of sight. There were no heroics in his grip, as he pulled a wounded sergeant by the straps of a torn lifebelt, used as an improvised drag. He kept his back low and his head down, fixed on the hedge that now felt like the far shore of a river. When a burst cut the snow to his left, he paused, not in fear, but to calculate. He had 1 smoke grenade left. He measured the distance to the next stand of spruce and the angle of approach that would keep the bank between him and the machine gun. He rolled the cylinder, watched it spin and settle, then bloom. The field disappeared into a neutral shroud. Voices flattened. The sergeant's breathing steadied. It was not courage, as the newspapers liked to define it. It was procedure carried to the edge of its map. An after-action note described a curious delay in the enemy's timetable on that sector, citing uncertainty about American dispositions and the risk of walking into registered artillery. The note credited defensive smoke and disciplined withdrawal. It did not name the source of the smoke, only the effect. Elsewhere that day, other companies fell back under pressure and reformed at crossroads, where engineers had set charges under culverts. In the aid station, lit by a lantern and a slit of winter sun, the medic rinsed snowmelt from his hands with iodine-stained water and counted his remaining dressings. He borrowed 2 smoke grenades from a mortar crew who understood the trade. Personal accounts written later by men from the company described the cold first, then the quiet left behind, once they crossed the next tree line. They remembered the smell of smoke in scarves and the odd brightness of snow turned grey by chemical fog. They wrote about the steady figure in a medic's helmet who walked ahead as if telling the ground where to rise. A private recalled the pattern of his movements more than his face, always on the shortest line between a wounded man and cover, always turning back once he delivered the load. Memory fixed him not as a singular saviour, but as a dependable fact, like the hedge and the ditch that marked the field's end. Medical services doctrine in the theatre set clear priorities: stop hemorrhage, maintain airway, prevent shock, and move the casualty to a safer echelon of care. No paragraph contemplated a medic shaping the ground for an entire platoon with smoke and timing, yet battlefield roles often expanded under the pressure of events. Non-combatants learned the geometry of fire and movement because they had to. Infantry learned that saving lives sometimes demanded the materials of concealment as urgently as dressings and morphine. The medic's actions followed that logic, quiet and exact within a loud confusion. By afternoon, the line had shortened and stiffened along a low ridge with a view west. Artillery finally reached its rhythm and imposed order on the map with numbered concentrations. The German battalion shifted to the south to find a softer edge. The field lay empty, marked by 2 dark patches where smoke had dampened the snow. Litter-bearers returned the long way to avoid observation, boots crunching on a track that led past discarded tins and a stiffened bandage roll dropped in haste. In the aid station, the medic logged names, times, and basic notes with tidy handwriting that ignored the tremor in his fingers. The broader implications of that morning lay beyond a single field. Morale rests in part on the belief that withdrawal can be managed without collapse, that a unit can cede ground and keep its shape. Smoke is more than concealment. It is a statement that movement still belongs to those who choose it. When the medic placed that screen, he gave form to an idea. The company was not done, merely rearranging its line under deliberate control. This mattered to men who measured their world in yards, minutes, and the visible signs of order. After the push eased, the battalion tallied its losses and its equipment with the same clinical tone used for water discipline and vehicle maintenance. Reports noted cold injuries rising and requested more foot powder and dry socks by priority. They asked for smoke munitions in quantities that suggested a lesson learned. The company's morning count of effective rifles increased by a margin small in numbers and large in meaning. Several who would otherwise have stayed in the field arrived at the aid station instead, bandaged and breathing. He slept briefly that night on a stretcher frame, boots still on, helmet at his side, hands cramped from clamps and carries. When the alarm sounded again before midnight, he rose, checked the bag and placed 2 fresh smoke grenades where his fingers would find them without looking. He understood the day had not been exceptional, except in the concentration of need. He had done what training demanded, and circumstance enlarged. The field that morning would be a paragraph in a report and a line in a man's memory. It would not be a legend, and that was its strength. In the years after, the map coordinates narrowed to a name passed quietly at reunions, a reminder that systems of care can influence the geometry of battle as surely as guns. Veterans described that winter with a tone that had few superlatives and many details: the weight of wet wool, the taste of metal on cold air, the steadying sight of a white cloud where a line had been thin. The medic's part endured not as a tale of defiance but as an example of applied craft under conditions that punished improvisation. The next morning, frost again held to the hedge, and the field lay under a pale sky, ordinary and anonymous. For those who crossed it, the memory returned with the smell of smoke that had once turned danger into distance, a simple tool in the hands of a man who understood that time could be made. If you value these stories of history's quiet moments, a subscription helps us continue preserving them.